Hello and welcome back to Cosmic Rescue. I'm Cecily Saylor. I'm the founder of Typewriter Tarot, and this is a show where I talk to creative people about a creative problem they're facing, and we explore that problem using the magic and beauty of tarot. Today I'm talking with Alejandro Puyana, who is a fiction writer in the Michener Center creative writing program based at the University of Texas, a highly acclaimed, much coveted program for many aspiring writers. Alejandro is also the founder with his brother of a construction company. So he not only builds wonderful stories, he also builds beautiful buildings. And he also comes from Venezuela, that's his home country, which features prominently in a novel that he's currently working on. And in this conversation, we talk about what it's like when you're working on such a long project to really stay connected to the reason that you started out in the first place, and how to navigate the different aspects of creating a book that is so long, so involved, a story that keeps unfolding and also requires both research and creativity. So we explore a little bit of that. You'll see Alejandro get a reading from me, and we also share with you the tarot spread that we use in this episode so that you can test it out on your own creative projects, whether that's writing a novel, creating a song, sewing a quilt, whatever it may be. We hope you enjoy the episode. If you even like the first few minutes, please give it a like. And we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel as well so that you can be first to know when a new video drops. Hope you enjoy. Alejandro, welcome to Cosmic Rescue. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Hi, Cecily. Thank you for having me.
Alejandro Puyana is a fiction writer, and Ale, you are currently getting your MFA at the Michener Center at the University of Texas, a very prestigious, exalted creative writing program, much the envy of other writers. And interestingly, I find this very fascinating about you, that you're such a successful writer, but you also run a construction business called La Sabana. I just love it when people can do two completely different things successfly. It's always like
or try to do them.
I mean, if you try, you can do at least some of it. So it makes me think you're a little bit of a wizard. So and more to prove that even further, one of your short stories was recently, well, it was originally published in American Short Fiction. It's called The Hands of Dirty Children, and it is now coming out in the latest edition of Best American Short Stories. So exciting. And that anthology comes out on the day of the presidential election, ominously enough. So everyone should look out for it. And Alejandro is going to talk a little bit about the novel that he's working on and what that's been like during the pandemic. But will you just start, Ale, telling us a little bit about kind of your journey personally and your journey toward writing, and how that's going to figure into your story and our conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Venezuela, spent my childhood there. Both my parents are Venezuelan. And, went to high school, went to college, and right after college, politically things in Venezuela were starting to get a little bit more complicated. Chavez came into power in, 1998. Or at least that was the year of the election. I was entering into college around that time. That was the first election I ever voted on, was the Chavez election. And after finishing college, I decided to apply to some schools in the U.S. To go to grad school, as a way to maybe escape the situation a little bit. But always with the hopes of returning fairly soon to the country. So my plan had always been to maybe spend 5 years in the US, then go back and just work on advertising and back in practice. But it was one of those things where things just got harder and harder back home, back in Venezuela. The economy was getting worse. And just politically, things were getting really heated. My whole family was back there. at the time. And there was just, a lot of stuff going on back home. So I decided just to stay and wait a few more years. That has now turned to, let's see, I got here in 2006. So it's been 14 years. Yeah, about 14 years. Since I left. So that's the plans haven't quite worked out. And while I was here in Austin, right after I graduated from my degree in advertising, my brother was kidnapped back home, and it created this upheaval in my family. Of course, he was fine. He got through it, thankfully. But it really kind of made a number on me. And really the only way that I could explore what I was feeling about the situation, about being away from home, still having all these affections and all these connections back there, and not really be able to do anything, is what moved me into writing. It was really the only way to explore all the questions that I was having that came up. So I wrote a few essays about that experience, about what it felt like to have a brother in such danger and feeling completely removed from the world I wanted to be in and the people I wanted to be with. And that's kind of what awoke the writer in me. I had written before short stories and little things here and there through college, but hadn't really thought about it as a career or so that sort of is what led me into that. So I started writing, stories and essays, got into a couple of workshops locally in Austin, and kept working at it, still very much as just something that I enjoyed doing, with no real future vision for it in any sort of way. But then that progressed, and I was lucky enough to get a couple of things published here and there. And that question, though, of the kidnapping of my brother always sort of remained as something that I just needed to explore in a deeper way. And I was especially, I don't know why, but I just kept thinking about the people that had kidnapped my brother, because they were fairly young, younger than him when he was kidnapped. He was in his early 20s. So they were teenagers, most likely. At least some of them were. There were 3 of them. And one in particular, because the kidnapping lasted quite a bit of time, it actually sort of became this hostage situation. The police came to the place that they were trying to rob. My brother was held there while the place was surrounded by policemen. So my brother actually had, a few hours to spend with these people. And one person in particular, my brother and him made a connection during this process. They talked. The guy was pretty sorry about everything that was happening. And I just couldn't stop thinking about that conversation that they had. And I wanted to understand that guy better. And of course, I couldn't talk to him. There was no way to sort of reach him. So I just started to have imaginary conversations in my head. And I think that's what led me to the novel that I'm working on now. I've been working on it for about, probably about 5 years now. Obviously before it wasn't very serious. I was still exploring it. I'm now sort of in the thick of, writing every day and doing that kind of stuff. But back then it was just an exploration of who is this person? And that evolved into other characters and other things, but that was the seed of the novel for sure.
Yeah, and it just seems I'm so glad that your brother is safe and he survived that safely. And I I know that homesickness is like such a powerful space of longing. Like it's so emotional and hard to, you can't satisfy it really with anything other than home itself, you know?
Yeah.
So it makes sense that, or it seems rather lovely that you can try and explore that place that is your home, through work, through your creative work and through your novel. When we spoke before, you talked about how the pandemic really made you question some parts, not parts of the novel, but your work toward it or your ability to work with it, especially in the moment. How did that happen? Like, what was happening for you once the pandemic came and upended everything?
Yeah, I think this, has happened to a lot of people, at least a lot of the people that I in my program that are also writers I know have struggled with this as well. But for me, it was a feeling of maybe my work is not important right now. At least at the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like things were so chaotic and people were suffering so much, which they still are, of course. Um, and things were so crazy and so uncertain that working on fictional characters, even characters that I've grown to love in these years, and even writing about my country that is obviously extremely important to me, it still felt like fiction. And there were kind of real things going on, and it felt unimportant to go back to work in a certain way. Um, so it was really hard. I mean, for the first 2 months of quarantine, I just couldn't work. It wasn't happening. And then one day something cracked open, and I just rode this wave of productivity that lasted for like 3 weeks. I was able to finish the first part of my novel, which I had been struggling for a while. And since then, it's sort of, it's been waves. I've been more productive. I've made myself sort of get over that feeling, and also the fact that work is important in and of itself. I mean, it's important to get down and put stuff on the page. And it might be harder some days than others, and you might not get a lot of great work done some days, but I mean, it's still, you have to get those words out to get to the good ones.
Yeah. Is there more you want to share about the novel itself, or yeah, tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. So the working title is "Freedom is a Feast." That might very well change, and it takes place in 3 different time periods of Venezuelan history. The first part takes place in the 1960s. It focuses on a young, idealistic guerrilla fighter. There was a leftist movement going on in Venezuela at that time, inspired by the Cuban Revolution and that whole kind of Latin American movement of the 50s and 60s. And Stanislavo, the character, is in the jungles of eastern Venezuela, gets captured with his 2 friends, and is also dealing with its own doubts about the movement, and sort of that unfurls in that historical period. Then the second part jumps to the early 2000s, where Chavez is already president. He's been through a few very rocky years in the presidency. Oil prices are really low. He has a lot of resistance from international media, local media. People with money in the country were not very happy with him as president. And a coup happens. He gets thrown out of power for very chaotic 3 days. So I go into that period. There's a new protagonist in that section, a woman whose son is shot the day of the protests. He's a child at that time, and she has to deal with her 10-year-old child being shot while all this chaos is happening. And Stanislavo is back in that section. He's the owner of a newspaper now, and he's covering the protests and the coup. And then the third part of the novel, which is really what started the whole novel, is about the boy that's shot. He's now a young man. It's 2013. And he's just kidnapped a couple of young men, and eventually gets thrown in prison. So it's the story of him kind of going through that experience. And Stanislavo also returns there, as does the mom from the previous section. So they're all kind of connected. And at that time in 2013, Chavez was dying of cancer. So you also sort of see the historical context of kind of closing the chapter of, the leftist movement in Venezuela, how it shifts through history or recent history. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite ambitious. You're really trying to articulate the history of the country, or an important part of its history, and also these, it seems like one thing you're grappling with the characters and with the true life experience that your brother went through is like, where do these violent impulses come from? How are we teaching each other to enact these violent impulses when, as you found out in your brother's case, when he's just sharing intimate space with his kidnapper, they actually have something very much in common. And there's like intimacy there in the midst of this violence. It seems like a lot to wrestle with. And I'm sure you're doing it beautifully. And I can see why the pandemic would, create pause for anyone in their creative work. But we came up with a tarot spread to try and help sort some of that out. So we did a 4-card tarot spread. And the first one was, our first question was asking for a card that could remind you why you started and why the novel and the project still matters. A really important question when you're feeling kind of untethered from your work. And then question 2, how to know when to focus on the intellectual part of the work. And question 3, how to know when to focus on the emotional part of the work. And as you described in the novel, there's, you have to do research. You weren't alive in the time of the 60s. And maybe that was some history you already know, but also being separated from the country for more than a decade, you're having to do research and reading and educate yourself so you can funnel that into the story. So you had talked about those periods of like research, where you're not really writing, but you're learning, versus going back to the writing and the creation. And I think you had mentioned something like the research is really important, but it can also, you kind of worried that it would become an excuse for not doing the writing. Like, oh, I'm researching, and then the writing gets further and further away. So these 2 cards were about kind of understanding when to make those switches between the intellectual study that would ground the novel and the emotional part of it, which is delicate for you too, because it is very personal. Mm-hmm. And then that 4th card we had was a message from your ancestors, a question I always really love to ask in tarot, and one that seems particularly important as you connect with your place of origin. So let's go ahead and talk about the cards that came up for you.
Sure.
The first card, or in the first question, a card to remind you why you started and why it matters. You got the 6 of Wands, which is a really beautiful celebratory card. And it's not just like a card of like accomplishment, like you finished, you did it. It's a card of having had a purpose, going out to achieve that purpose, and then returning successfully, not just on your own to like celebrate your personal achievements, but fulfilling achievements that are beneficial to the community as a whole, and having the community kind of recognize your contribution at the same time. So in a traditional deck, you'll see a figure riding a horse, and he's wearing a beautiful red cape, and there's all these people around him holding up their wands in celebration. So like he's just come home, he's just completed this great feat of whatever, and everyone's celebrating that. And so this really kind of reminded me of you venturing away from home, so that you could also gain another perspective and experience a different culture, a different geography, a different learning environment. And that, you know, without only by kind of leaving what you had known, can you look back from a kind of removed perspective and start to assimilate and digest some of these experiences and this knowledge that you have. And so I just see this as you like writing away from Venezuela, but becoming a writer that adds to the legacy of that country's literature and also America's literature as well. And whatever you create, I know will be meaningful for Venezuelans, for American readers, for many kinds of readers, and particularly as a artistic record of the country and its development and what it's been like to grow up and live in Venezuela, and also watch it go through chaos from far away. That's a big mouthful, but what did you see in this card, maybe that I didn't pick up on?
I mean, I'm as you know, Cecily, I'm by no means an expert in tarot. I've just had a handful of readings throughout my life. For some reason, I always seem to have wands in my in the things that I pull. So maybe you can talk about that a little.
What's your astrological sign again?
I'm an Aries.
Yeah, so you're a fire sign. There's why.
No, but this card gave me a great feeling when I pulled it, even without knowing really what it was. It seemed, first of all, it's a beautiful card. That deck just has beautiful illustration. It seemed, yeah, celebratory to me. And after hearing you talk about it, it resonates deeply. Mostly because one of the things that I've been struggling with this novel is how to write it in a way that both pays deep respect to the country and not dumbing it down for anybody else. But at the same time, I want other people that are not Venezuelans to know kind of what's going on there, at least from my perspective, and sort of get a feeling of what Venezuelans are going through. You know, we've become a country of diaspora for the first time in our history. Venezuela for many, many years has been very similar to the United States in this regard, in which we were a country that brought in immigrants. We weren't a country that let them out for most of our history. But now things have flipped. And in cities across the world, you're starting to see significant numbers of Venezuelans arriving, creating immigrant communities, opening restaurants, doing all that stuff. And I do want to add to the legacy of Venezuelan writers and, you know, try to add my grain of sand into that tradition.
Seeing this card also, as you were talking, made me think of a future moment when you do get to return to Venezuela, and maybe you have like a book signing, and there's your community of people and your book, and you're back home for a time.
So.
Yeah. So for the question, how to know when to focus on the intellectual part of the work, you had the Page of Wands. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the other question as well. So how to know when to focus on the emotional part of the work. You had 8 of Wands. So you have 3 Wands in a row in your reading. So the Page of Wands is kind of like this figure who is ready to launch into some pursuit. Like they're holding that wand. It kind of reminds me of a person like who just strapped on the jet pack and is ready to like jet off into the sky. But there's a little bit of like checking first, like making sure you're really ready for this little flight that you're going to be taking. The pages are also kind of new to their level of mastery, so they have a lot to learn, but they're very eager to be taught and eager to develop their skills. So with this card, we kind of talked about that being a little more of, well, let's look at the Eight of Wands too. So the Eight of Wands, it just has 8 wands flying through the sky. And this is one of the few cards in tarot that has no human beings in it. It's just the symbol itself times 8. And of course, this is a fire symbol. So that's a lot of fire, a lot of energy, a lot of heat. And that's, I think starting with that card is actually more helpful because it's like how to connect with the emotional part of the work. I think that or when I saw this card, it made me think like you will have these moments of kind of emotional ignition, maybe something you're seeing on the news or something that you're reading in your research or a memory that comes back to you in as you go about your day or in a dream or whatever brings up this emotional content. And then the fire is kind of started. And that's a good time to like ride those wands to the, to the laptop and start, funneling that energy, that emotional energy onto the page, even if it's raw, even if it's intense, even if it's messy, at least you have all this raw material to work with. And then the Page of Wands is just holding one wand and standing there kind of surveying everything, trying to make their next move, getting ready to go on a journey of greater mastery. But side by side, you can see the dynamism of the Eight of Wands versus the more collected kind of cooling off part of the Page of Wands. Someone who has access to that fire, but can decide, maybe be a little more discerning about how to use it. Anything that came up when you kind of saw these two cards?
Yeah, some of those similar feelings. What I think is more interesting is how those cards have played out since we last talked about them, because first of all, I think the Eight of Wands was a great example of what happened when I started writing after those first 2 months of the pandemic. It felt very kind of creatively driven, very fire-like in the way that I approached the writing at that time. I mean, I had written nothing for 2 months. Then one day, just inspiration came and I wrote for 3 weeks straight. I created a lot of pages. It felt very sort of from a well somewhere where it was coming. And then when we talked, I was spending some time with my partner's family in Minneapolis. We were in this beautiful cabin, away from everyone, away from COVID world. And it did feel very Page of Wands like. And I had brought a couple of books to read about the coup in Venezuela in 2002. And I just felt so free to explore that without the pressure of producing pages. And yeah, it felt like, somebody surveying the land before kind of taking the first steps into it. And it worked just like that. I mean, I read those books, I got super inspired, and partly there in Minnesota, partly when I came back, used that information to just finish my second part of the novel. Yeah, those two cards seem to sort of mimic my process during that time. But on the cards themselves, there are a few things that jumped out at me when I first saw them, especially in the Page of Wands, which is a more kind of complex card in terms of what's on the card itself. In the deck that we were using, and I don't have it in front of me, but I kind of remember The page is sort of almost wearing almost like a blindfold on, but also has equipment on like a backpack and maybe something that looks like almost like an antenna, kind of waiting for signals to kind of come in. And that struck me, especially when I first saw it. Yeah.
Now that you, as you were talking, it made me think of trackers, like people who are really skilled at being out in the wilderness and like listening for, like looking at animal tracks, smelling certain smells. And that, like when you were talking about the antenna, someone who can read the landscape with this like heightened sensitivity to information, but they're not like doing a lot. They're just standing there kind of receiving. And that really seems to fit with like that bringing in all of this information that you have to kind of process before you can channel it back into the novel.
Yeah. I do wish that every day was an 8 of Wands day. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but you would be so burned out. You would just be. It might be a lot. It might be a lot even for an Aries of your wizardry level. But cool. And your last question was a message from your ancestors. And here you have the moon reversed. And before we even talk about that, I just want to notice that in this 4-card spread, you have 3 wands cards, the 6, the 8, and the page. And interesting that you're a fire sign and you have all this fire in the reading. So 3 from the major arcana, 3 from the same suit. The fact that they are all fire, not just that you're a fire sign, but that that the material is intense. Like there's a heat there, there's a warmth, and there's also that's kind of the fire that fuels your creativity more broadly. And then for the ancestor card, you have this major arcana card, the moon. And this is one thing you can kind of do when you're looking at readings, is like how many of the cards come from the major arcana, how many come from the minor. The major arcana are talking about like the development of your soul in this lifetime over like your higher purpose kind of thing. And then the minor arcana are kind of like how you play that out in this earthly realm day to day with like going to work, dealing with the people you're in relationship with, taking care of a home, all those sorts of like practical matters. So when it gets to the ancestors, they want to talk about what's going on at your soul level. And so they give you the moon reversed. And the moon is a card of like moving into the subconscious, going into like a dream space where things are very, things can feel sort of distorted and unusual. A lot of elements that might be familiar get reconstituted in these strange formations, similar to like what you've lived through in your actual life is being reconstituted into the novel. And the reversal kind of shows either like a hesitation or, maybe a hesitation, or maybe like nearing a phase of completion, but not quite there yet. So I kind of took this as the ancestors kind of viewing you and your purpose as one of exploring these lunar scapes where things don't completely make sense. It's like the Page of Wands who's standing, I made that comparison to the tracker, right? Someone who has like this really sensitive antenna and lots of skills in terms of like following someone or something through a wilderness. That you can go like a tracker into these spaces of the subconscious, into spaces that don't make a lot of sense to other people. And there you can gather a lot of information, a lot of signals, a lot of messages that you can channel into your literary work. Like it's kind of difficult to go to the place of the moon because it is hard to make sense of it. It is not like the sunny, beautiful, bright world that we hope we normally live in, where all the buildings are upright and people sort of behave as usual. But in the moon place, it's like being on a weird acid trip, basically. And if you're not prepared for it, or if you're easily flummoxed by it, you would get really disoriented and very afraid. But I feel like the ancestors are saying, Ale, like you can go there. You have all of the courage, you have all of the interpretive skills, you have all the ability to witness and assimilate the information. You may be a little bit afraid to go there, but I think they're sort of encouraged, which is, I say that because the card is reversed. Like there may be some hesitation about it, but they seem to be reminding you that, you know, you have that capacity. And when you're one of the people who has the capacity, it's almost your responsibility to go and see what's there and bring the information back for the rest of us who are too afraid. What else? How has this card played out for you, or what did it mean for you that I'm not talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it is a scary card. It's like, I think when you see it reversed, there's like almost like fangs that kind of show up. And it does sort of reflect maybe the painful nature of the work of revisiting sort of these individual, but also kind of social traumas that Venezuelans carry. And it's definitely hard to step into that place sometimes. I think that's partly what drove my third question about when is it the moment to delve into emotional aspects of the work, because it is work that, you know, makes me homesick, makes me want to go back to where I came from. So yeah, the moon reversed seems like a place that I want to go into, but I have to be careful with. And yeah, it's a little bit of a scary card, I guess, when I saw it.
Yeah. And I believe that we all carry the legacy of our ancestors, information from their lifetimes, obviously genetic information, also the traumas that they've experienced. So we're not aware of all of that information that's stored inside of us or how it's stored inside of us. And not everyone thinks this is true, and that's great. But yeah, like when you're writing with this material, you also open yourself up to the possibility of those parts of the subconscious that you inherited and that you lived through bubbling up for you in ways that you're not expecting. And then you definitely have to deal with them at that point. So it is, I think they are inviting you to go there, and also probably affirming the need to be safe about it, to be cautious, to be a little bit of Page of Wands, like watching rather than running at great speeds through the lunar scape that you're navigating. Has anything changed for you since you pulled these cards? Did the reading do anything for your process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I talked about it a little bit already, but that dynamic between the Page of Wands and the Eight of Wands has really played out since we did this reading originally. It's been, you know, a month or a little bit more than a month since then. And that's how it's played out. I've really used that research that was done for a few weeks to fuel the writing that I did for the next, 3 weeks. And now I've got, maybe 10,000 words left to finish my draft. I'm submitting the first 2 parts of my novel to my fiction workshop tomorrow. So it's all sort of like starting to come together. And I think thankfully I've sort of put behind that notion that maybe the work wasn't as important. That has certainly gone to the background, and I can enjoy the work again and sort of go in it freely and with intention and with ambition and with, good ambition, but ambition nonetheless. Yeah.
Your Aries ambition. That's good. That's great. Well, good. And once you understand, I think when the cards show you, like, this is how the process is working, like Eight of Wands, Page of Wands, then when you get into that cycle again, you don't have to really second guess it. It's sort of like, right, we already talked about this. This is kind of how it works. So it spares you a little bit of heartache you might have had. But yeah, well, thank you, Alejandro, so much for talking about your novel. I know it'll take a little more time to bring it into the world, but we can't wait to see it and read it and learn from it. And it just means a lot for you to share this with us. And people can find you in the meantime and kind of follow what you're up to on Twitter at Puyana and on Instagram at @Puyana. And that Best American Short Stories 2020 comes out November 3rd, 2020, where you can find Alejandro's story, The Hands of Dirty Children. And thanks, Alejandro. I love talking tarot with you, and take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
We'd love for you to try this tarot spread on your own. And just to review, here are the 4 different questions or prompts for each of the 4 cards in this spread. First of all, how can I stay connected or reminded of my purpose in this project? Why did I start this? Why does it matter? Question number 2, how do I know when to focus on the intellectual part of this project, the intellectual part of the work? Question 3, how do I know when to focus on the emotional part of the work? And question 4, a message from your ancestors. So give this a try. No matter what you're working on, it'll be interesting to see what comes up and what messages you receive, and then also find out how you want to funnel that information into the project that you're working on. We'd love to find out what works for you, what happened in your reading. If there are any questions you have, feel free to drop them in the comments, and we'd love to provide more information if that's what you're looking for. And of course, we're always here to support you in other ways. We provide one-on-one readings. We bring tarot to events. We have a membership program where you can deepen your learning around a tarot practice, a spiritual practice, or a creative practice, or how all of those different things combine in your life. You can find out more at typewritertarot.com, and you can also find us on social media. We would love to get to know you. We appreciate you watching, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Special thanks to Alejandro for coming on the show, and also to the Magical Objects for their theme song, I'm Ready. And thanks as well to Anar Verold, who is the editor of our Cosmic Rescue series. Thank you, Anar. Thank you, everyone else. We'll see you in a couple weeks with a new episode.